What's up, grinders? Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to check out this video, why I don't use space repetition to learn vocab. Now, I've done a few reacts to Steve as of recently. In fact, no, I did one react, then someone did a react to me, and I reacted to them, and it was a backwards and forwards. And I don't even think Steve was aware that this was going on, but I did do a react to him, and how I believe he was misrepresenting Flashcard. So I'm now curious to see what he's got to say about space repetition. Is this in a Flashcard context? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Today, I'm going to talk about vocabulary. How do we best acquire vocabulary, words? I've always felt that words are the key measure of where we are in a language, of our potential in the language. How many words do we know? But the bigger thing is, how do we acquire the words? If we have very few words, we cannot do much with the language. If we have a wide vocabulary, we may need a lot of practice in speaking in order to become fluent speakers, but we have a base. We have the potential to become fluent speakers of the language. So words are essential. Now, of course, much has been written about learning words, teaching words. When I started up Link 20 years ago, I bought all these books on how languages are taught, how vocabulary is acquired. Lots of good theory, which I will get into. Here's another one. Of course, lists of phrases and phrasal verbs and all kinds of things that are very difficult to learn from if you don't see them in enough contexts. And even when we talk about vocabulary, how should we count words? If the word is simply a form of the word, like a plural of the verb, should that be counted? Should it be counted separately when it is a different part?
Like, I would just count that as a separate word realistically, because it doesn't follow any regular pattern, but this makes no difference at the end of the day. Like, whether you've learned 6,000 words or 6,500 or 20,000 because you're counting all the extensions, realistically, what you need to think about is, how does that help you? If you're just upping the number because you want to up the number and, feel more impressive about what you've managed to achieve, it doesn't help your fluency. People and person, I would consider that separate words. Just because they're two separate words, I would have to learn. They're not like regular in any form. But, like the Esperanto words, for example, manjis, manjas, manjos, I'd count that as one. Because the is, us, and os at the end there, that's a regular conjugation that applies to all verbs. So there's no point, and there's no changing in the root. There's no point counting those as separately. And that's just purely from the perspective of what I need to learn.
Of speech, there's this concept of verb families, audacious, audacity quickly comes to mind. Is that the same family or is it significantly different? So these are difficult lines to define. That's why at Link, I always say your word count is...
I guess for him, because he runs, some software that counts how many words you know, it's in some way important. But like for anyone else who's not using this type of thing, it's not that important unless that is the metric you're working by.
Mostly an indication of how active you've been. And activity is the key to success in language learning. It's not something that you can claim that you have these words. In fact, words that we acquire are basically connections to meaning. And according to British-Canadian AI luminary, Professor Hinton, when we learn a word, it's not like something we have in a filing cabinet somewhere. Every time we encounter that word, we are basically reconstituting a range of connections. We are regenerating meaning within our brains so that it's not isolating a word, but rather weighting different aspects of the language based on that encounter with the word. In fact, it reminds me a bit of the parable of the fish trap that I use in my book. Here's the Chinese version of The Linguist on Language. And, Zhuangzi said, fish trap is used to catch.
Bro, he's so good at presenting his products. We've gone from LinkedIn, we've had the logos up there, we've got his books over there. He's really good at this.
Fish, just like words are used to capture meaning. Once we have the meaning, we no longer need the words. And that's essentially how we learn. In fact, what often happens is we're not aware of a word. We start to notice the word. Now we notice the word everywhere. But once that word is known, then we no longer notice it because it's known. As Dronza said, we have the meaning, now we no longer need the word.
I don't have that experience all the time. Like, there is instances where that's true. I've learnt a word, say, for example, an Anki or something, and then suddenly I've noticed it everywhere in content. And then obviously with time, you don't notice it. Like, that does happen with some words, but then there's other words you just learnt it in the flashcard system, and before you realize, oh, okay, well, that word's just been popping up left, right, and center, and I didn't even realize, and I knew it. I just my attention wasn't brought to it.
We may notice it again when it appears in some other context or in a different meaning or connected with different collocations, which is a fancy word for describing the phenomenon that certain words are used more often with other words. So as we acquire more and more words, and of course we acquire that predominantly through massive exposure to the language, then the brain has its ability, as with large language models, to predict the next word. In other words, we are acquiring an overall familiarity with the language.
People need to stop referring to how we learn languages as akin to a large language model. I know those systems, okay, they were built off of how a human works, like how they believe a human acquires language and stuff like that. However, there's a massive difference. A large language model is you give it the entire corpus of humanity, boom, and it scans through the whole thing. And every single encounter, it waits instantly. The human brain doesn't work like that. There's so many instances where, we will just jump over things and skip and ignore it. And I know we've had this debate on this channel. There's been people have reacted to me and they're like, no, your brain doesn't ignore it. It waits. It's just you're not aware. No, there's lots of stuff your brain ignores. It really does, okay? The human brain likes to get rid of stuff it doesn't need. It focuses in on things it needs. So you will be forgetting a lot. It's just how it is, okay? Now, obviously, I can't point out exactly what you've forgotten. You can't even, as the viewer of the content. But it does happen. Like, it's like any form of memory, okay? I don't remember what I had 3 weeks ago for breakfast. Like, that's forgotten. It's gone, okay? There's no coming. You can bring someone in here to hypnotize me and try to recover it, but it's not coming back.
Is a part. And of course, in these books on how to teach vocabulary, the point is often made that we should engage with comprehensible input, hopefully compelling or interesting, but it's not necessarily that way when we're at the beginning. And the suggestion is we should engage with content that is just n+1. In other words, has a few.
By the way, that's not an argument, everything I was saying there, that's not an argument against using comprehensible input. That's just stating the fact that comprehensible input works in large volume. You need a lot in order to push a lot into your brain because a lot of it will just be dumped.
Unknown words in it, which is a great idea in theory, but in practice, very difficult because that way we would be forever, having enough exposure through reading and listening that we would encounter all the vocabulary we need. Because another issue in vocabulary acquisition is the problem with frequency. It's easy to acquire the high frequency vocabulary. It takes a long time to acquire the less frequent vocabulary.
That's kind of not true. And I'm saying that based on my experience with ALG. Some of the most common words actually have taken the longest for me to acquire. I'm talking about even pronouns. Like there were certain pronouns in Spanish that they took like 600 hours to acquire. While I was acquiring all these random ass nouns, adjectives, even verbs and stuff, but they just took forever. And then there's other words, like the word although and stuff. I think like I first noticed that around 400 hours of input. So it's like those words, I would assume were actually in the high frequency. Like they're appearing a lot. However, they're not easily able to be picked up from content. You'd think pronouns were, but for some reason, only certain pronouns are. Like, I, you, these pronouns are. Maybe due to how the content's generated, and maybe he and she, but there's certain pronouns that are just not so much. Like, I'm talking reflexive pronouns, It may be high frequency, doesn't mean you're going to acquire it. What you acquire is what's obvious from context. And that's not necessarily what's highly frequent.
However, the less frequent vocabulary is often key to any particular context.
And here's another thing. Sometimes words that are not frequent at all, you pick up just randomly. You just happen to get that one okay. And there could be instances where maybe it just sounds similar to something in another language. And then you've got it instantly. Okay, you just acquired it straight out of the box. You didn't, like when I'm talking about acquiring, I mean understanding here. I'm not talking about production of speech. So it's not just the perfect system. That's all I'm just trying to say. Okay, like I'm sure he's not trying to say that either, but like I just want to stress that what you acquire is not necessarily what you aim for if you're just doing like a pure input approach.
And that again brings us to the next subject, which is specialized vocabulary. People think that you have to specifically try to learn business English or scientific English or academic English, whereas in fact, if you use content of that kind, listening and reading, then that is naturally the kind of vocabulary that you will acquire. And even within different domains, the frequency, which declines very quickly, will decline very quickly in each domain. So you have to familiarize yourself with that domain that's important to you. Now, teachers like to get into, strategies for acquiring vocabulary, strategies for inferring meaning, pre-reading exercises, critical thinking exercises. I happen to believe that all of those things are a waste of time. Another strategy is spaced repetition.
Okay, I just want to hear that again. I wasn't...
Strategies for inferring meaning, pre-reading exercises, critical thinking exercises. I happen to believe that all of those things are a waste of time.
I'm not really sure what those exercises are, in honesty. So I can't say whether they are a waste of time or not. Pre-reading exercises, what would that be? I'm not sure. Maybe someone in the comments can let me know.
Another strategy is spaced repetition systems, which again, I don't consider that useful because they treat the word as an isolated item in a filing cabinet, so to speak, rather than an opportunity to regenerate within our brain a sense of...
I don't know why he keeps pushing this idea. It's not an isolated word. You could say an isolated concept, and then sure, that's fine. But not... Like, people add to freaking flashcards all the time. I feel like I'm repeating freaking ground I've already walked over in previous videos.
Familiarity and understanding of the language, different weighting of different components of the language, structure, words, and so forth and so on. So, to me, that is not the way to go. However, I have to admit, I do review vocabulary.
I have been speaking about the Next Language Challenge on this channel quite a bit. And I proposed ideas, like a pure Anki type challenge. A lot of people thought that was cool, but then a lot of people pointed out it wouldn't be very useful in comparison to, say, like the Dreaming Spanish one. And other people proposed other ideas such as, Evildea, why don't you just do like, you know, an ALG style challenge, but just change one aspect of it? What aspect do you think? If the one aspect I was going to change would be, it would just be audio flashcards for those most important words that you're not going to pick up easily from acquisition. That'd be the one thing. And I guarantee just with audio flashcards, you would probably double your acquisition of the language, like the speed at which you acquire it. So if it took 1,000 hours to get to where I was in Spanish, you would do that in 500 hours just with audio flashcards. I swear to God, like, I believe that wholeheartedly. I almost believe that so wholeheartedly that I am prepared to do that with another language just to prove that goddamn point. That's how certain I am about that.
So how do I review vocabulary? How do I combine it with the major activity, which is a compelling input, listening and reading or speaking? First of all, a variety of ways to review is good. Variety is good. So I tend to vary what I do. Sometimes a list, sometimes flashcards. But I only do flashcards when there are a few of them and when they are closely connected to the text that I've been studying. Typically, that will be in...
Okay, so whether you do few flashcards or many flashcards, that's really dependent on the individual and how well they are able to handle the digestion of all those flashcards and reviews. Close to context makes sense. You want to be using flashcards that are related to what you're actually doing. Like, it would be absolutely stupid if I start doing flashcards about rocket science and I never watch anything about rocket science. Like, why the hell would I do that? The point is to get it into your brain so that when you see it in context, you've got a mental hook. Your brain's like, ooh, I've heard that. I know it. And it hooks into it, and then it adds all those connections rather than it trying to figure out what the hell this damn word is.
Sentence view. And I just go over them quickly. I don't scratch my brain. I don't try to force myself to retrieve anything. It's just a form of exposure. And particularly after...
So he's talking about exposure to vocab here. I'm assuming he does this in some type of list format from memory. Like, there's nothing wrong with that as well. Flashcards just basically pre-generate that list for you.
You're having struggled through the text, listening and reading, and trying to understand it, particularly when I'm in sentence mode, then a quick review of the vocabulary helps me to focus on those new vocabulary items, but very close to the context, typically in sentence mode. In fact, what I do is if I'm in sentence mode, I will do the flashcards.
I hate this style of flashcard. Like, this is the worst style to me. Like, I'm looking at this. I don't speak this language. I can answer these questions. Obviously, this one right here is this over here, okay? That's just straight up obvious. And therefore, you've got two other options, okay? You've got tingling pins and needles and raspberry, okay? So the choices here are now lampone and formicolio. Okay, so based on that, I'm guessing that this one here is raspberry. Now, I may be wrong, but I've already guessed this one right in here in the middle, okay? So this right here. Like, that was obvious as day. So what's the point of that flashcard? You're not actually learning anything. You're just pattern matching from obvious context.
Reviewing a lesson, I will only deal with a list, so I can go through the list very quickly. I do believe that it's useful to be nudged.
So a list is basically just like a pre-generated number of flashcards. Like, you could make a flashcard deck for a specific lesson if you wanted. Like fundamentally, there's no real difference between a list and just having some flashcards.
To do different activities, including vocabulary review. And in that context, I have enjoyed the language cup that we have at Link right now. I am in the Team Arabic, and the way it's structured at Link, every day, different activities are weighted differently. And so depending on the weighting that day, I will spend more...
Okay, so we've got... I hope the rest of this video is not just that.
...time on that activity. So, for example, when there were more points for more coins, as we say, more points for listening, then I made sure that I did a lot of listening. And I made sure that I listened in link, not away from link in a podcast. When creating links was prioritized, was given 3 times the value of other activities, then I went and did a lot of creating of links. On the other hand, on a day when known words has a bigger weighting, then I'll go back into my yellow words and try to see if I can't convert some of them, either in a list form or in context, into words that I already know. No matter what the activity is that's weighted. If it's reading, then I want to make sure I do more reading. So in a way, what I'm pointing out here is that it's useful to be nudged. It's useful to have goals that may seem a little artificial, which force you to become more active. But ultimately, in all of your activity, you have to go back, circle back, and pick up the pieces. Circle back, go over the same text maybe again, listen again, review your vocabulary again, in whatever form you prefer. And in a way, the easiest form of review is to simply listen. And if you have invested enough time in reading and possibly review, that more...
The title of this video is Why I Don't Use Spaced Repetition to Learn Vocab. But you were. You just weren't doing it in like an application flashcard style format. Because you're reviewing a list and then you're going over the content. By reviewing a list, that is essentially one review of a flashcard. Like, I'm just going to use flashcards here, okay? But then you're going to read over the text. Okay, that's the second review. And now you're talking about, going back over and over it again. That is SRS. That is spaced repetition. Like, this video is... You basically just showed us you doing spaced repetition.
More of the words in what you are listening to are known to you, you will notice them. You will notice them, or words that maybe are similar to words that you'll suddenly notice them, or a new context, a new phrase you'll notice. So all of the listening activity is also a form of review. And from that point of view, speaking is the most rewarding form of review. You have to try to retrieve the words that you need. You have to try to formulate your ideas. You're dealing with meaning. You're trying to output. And of course, you're going to make mistakes, and you're not going to be able to retrieve even words that you know, that tip of the tongue phenomenon, which I experienced.
I'm going to be honest, guys. So the reason I'm watching this video is because it was one of those things, someone asked me to check it out. Hey, what do you think of this new video from Steve? So I went and watched it. Okay. I don't think I'm going to watch Steve videos anymore. The reason being is because, 1, usually there's very little value. 2, it's all about his product, which is great. Okay, I understand you got a product, you need to sell it, blah, blah, you need to find customers. But, can we, have more than just, an extended version of your product review in every single video? And, this title doesn't even make sense. Why I don't use spaced repetition to learn vocab? You are. You showed us using it. You're not using a spaced repetition system as in Anki per se, where it's it's literally got the whole thing where it plans out the graph and everything, but you're still doing it. You're just doing it in a more natural form, I guess. So it's because you've got the list there. You're talking about going over the same content over and over. If you weren't actually using it, you weren't actually using some form of spaced repetition, you wouldn't be going over stuff again with a list. You'd read it, move on to the next thing, read it, move on to the next thing, read it. That's my thoughts on this. Anyway, I don't think I'm going to be watching any more videos from Steve in the future. That's just, I don't get much value out of them. So, that's pretty much it. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. See you all in the next video. If you're not there, I will find you. And I will create a list of all the ways I'm going to violate you.